Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and thank you for joining me for part 15 of the Employee Manager. We're going to focus on payroll, and that includes payroll details, the ability to select specific employees to add to a payroll, and whether we're going to filter by status, type, position, or salary, and add those employees to the payroll. And then, of course, we're going to be able to review those employees, looking at each employee's schedule as far as the deductions, additions, and of course, adding and saving to those employees and moving on to the next employee. And we also have a summary and create where we'll be able to have a summary of all the payroll and total. And then, of course, we're going to confirm and create that payroll. We've got that to show you, plus a lot more. So let's get started. Alrighty, thanks for joining me today on this Create Payroll training. In fact, we're going to cover over perhaps 1, 2, or 3 parts because it's going to be a big training, and we still have got a lot to do on the summary. We still need to do that. We have on the review, we still have some year-to-date to program in some formulas, but we're going to get started, and we've got a lot to cover. But before we get started, I just wanted to let you know about our Advanced Reports Dashboard Masterclass, which we have going on, which is this application here, which is a full 15-hour training. You'll have the ability to learn how to sort on click. You'll also have the ability to automatically filter based on partial selection. We've got amazing features in this application, including drill down and drill up, multiple financial reports, which we have on a profit and loss. We also have a pop-up picture feature. We've got the ability to toggle specific columns on single click. We have custom reports here, which you can add your own reports, customize it. We also have, of course, save on PDF, Excel, picture, as well as email on. So it's a ton of features. I'll include a link down there if you want to take a look at that. All of our weekly training is free, and to help support that, we do have these courses for you available. So I'll make sure to get you a link. All right, let's get started on the training. I've got so much to show you in this payroll. There's a lot of features that we haven't covered yet, so we want to make sure to cover those. In fact, in the employee, we're going to start off in the employee manager back into that sheet because there's some features that I did add there. In the employee manager, previously we had our payroll details, but our pay deductions and our pay additions were not working. In other words, any changes that we did were not saved, and any changes were not saved into a database. So we added some features there. In fact, a feature that requires the user to add in a frequency. So we've used conditional formatting, and I'm going to show you how that was done as well. So now we have the ability to save these. So when a user makes a change, they're automatically saved. And then, of course, when we reload those employees, those changes are automatically refilled in here. So we've got that going on as well. Same thing for pay deductions. Any changes that are made here are automatically saved to the database, and also the conditional formatting. We also have the same for taxes too. So we've got that as well, and taxes here. We've added in the ability to add taxes, and then that information is also saved here. So it's a great feature. So when we change employees, it's always cleared out, but when we go back to an existing employee, that information is saved, and we have a brand new table and database that I'm going to show you how we do that. So we're going to start on that because that's an integral part of the payroll. These pay deductions, pay additions, and tax information, all 3 of them are used within the payroll, because when we do bring up the payroll, and let's go ahead and click on that, when we are reviewing specific employees, we want that information to show up here. These employees don't have any. Let's pull, okay, this employee does. So we want those default taxes to show up here. We want those other payroll deductions to show up here. When we're reviewing a specific employee, we want to make sure that they're always here. So we have that ability, and so we need to bring that up. So when we're reviewing a specific employee, we can do that. So that's really important. So we want to get started on the employee manager first and show you how we created those 3 things. And if you'll notice a few things, you'll see these light blue numbers here and here. And of course, those are going to be hidden once this program is completed, and they'll be hidden using the same font color, just like we do, but these are help to guide us. These are going to guide us as to how to map the database, and that's something we've gone over in many lessons before, but it's so important. We'll go over it just once more on this training as well on how we map those to the database. And speaking of database, let's go ahead and take a look at a new sheet we have here. If we scroll over to the right here, we will see we've got a new sheet called Employee Pay Default Item. And what this default item is going to store those three items that we just talked about. Those include tax deductions, those include pay deductions, and pay additions. So each time we make those changes, in fact, that change that we just made, the health insurance here, 250 biweekly, that is saved here. So that's important part. So that's how we can recall it. And so with this item, this particular sheet is made up of an employee ID. We need to track the employee ID, so we need to know. We need to know what type. We need to know what table to store it in. Is it going to be a tax deduction? Is it going to be a pay addition or a pay deduction? Remember, we have three different tables that we're going to be storing in the employee manager here. In fact, let me bring that sheet over. I'm going to move that sheet over since we're focused on that all the way over here so we can quickly switch between these two here. Okay, let's go ahead and move. Now we have employee manager. So we've got three different tables here. We've got tax, federal and local tax deductions table. We have pay deductions. These are for any type of pay deduction, other pay deductions that might be paid on a specific paycheck. We have those available. And we have also pay additions, some things you might want to reimburse your employee for. So we've got those here. So we've got three different tables, but they're very, very similar. So when we have such similar databases and table, we can combine them into a single database as long as we separate them going in and we separate them going out. So we've done just that. So for all three of those are all included here because we have separated them by item type. So I've created a column called item type, and that's going to help decide which table they get stored in when they're brought back into the employee manager. All right, so we've got item name, we've got the name of the item, each of those have. We also have the tax items have both of these. The tax item, just the tax, have wage percentage and base limit. So I've created a specific column for those. You'll notice that pay additions and deductions don't have those items, but tax deduction items do. We also have the amount and the frequency. These are going to be used for pay additions and pay deductions. And I've got an employee manager row. What is this? Well, when I make a change, I want to make sure when we bring that information back into it, I want it on the same row. I don't want these to be resorted. I want them to be in the exact order that they were initially put in. So if we put in a health insurance or tools payment, we've already got those, and if we put that information in, I want it when we refresh the employee, I want it brought back in on the third row, exactly on row 110. I want that brought right back into that row so that when we change employees and it's cleared out and I bring back that employee and refresh that employee, I want it on the same exact row that we just created. I want that right here, back on row 110. So the best way to do that is to save this row number 110 so we can do just that in our employee development. So that way we save 110. Well, I'm going to put it right here. So when I bring it back, I know exactly what row it is. And we have another row, and this is row 16. This is the database. It's a formula. So that way, for example, if we need to change this, I know what row it's changed. So for example, if I change this to 130, I need to know what row in the database to make that change. That row is right here. So I know automatically row 16, I know the column, change it to 130. So when we go back in, you're going to see it's automatically been changed to 130. And that's how mapping helps. We know the row. We know that, of course, the amounts are always in F. So as long as we know the column and we know the row, we're going to be able to automatically update that. And so that's really, really helpful. And one of the things moving forward is when we have a new item. Well, what about when we have a new item? There is no row associated with that, right? Well, in that case, we know if there is no row associated, then use the first available row. What's going to be the first available row? In this case, it's going to be 17. So when we add a new, we know in VBA to make sure this is 17. So as soon as we add a new one, it's going to change to 7. That's going to create 17. And now we know. And now if you look here, it's a new row. So we go back into the database. We'll know automatically 17 now has a pay deduction, health insurance. So it's got all of the required. We don't need to add this information again. It's all here. All we need to do is make any changes here. So it could be the wage or base limit if it's a tax item, or it's going to be the amount or frequency if it's. So when we go ahead and back into that and we change it to 25, the amount, and we put in a frequency there, let's say monthly, that automatically is going to update. We know the row 17 already, so now it's just a simple update right here. So we know 25 in monthlies automatically be added. All right, so let's go. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that if the user enters an amount here, I want to make sure that we tell them, hey, we need a frequency too. The amount's not sufficient enough. I need to know how often. And that's going to be hold true in pay deductions or pay additions. So we can use conditional formatting. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Just highlight that. Go into the home and conditional formatting and manage rules. Let's take a look at the rules. There's just two rules. One of those rules is going to highlight the odd row or the even row in this case. We're using the mod. We've seen that before. And the other conditional formatting is brand new. And those are going to affect I-128 through I-139 and I-108 through I-119. Those are both for the pay deductions and the pay additions, because both of those rules will apply to both of those tables. And the rule is simple. There's two conditions. What are the two conditions? One, let's go ahead and close this out for a second. One, we need an amount here, that's one condition, and this needs to be blank. So there's two conditions. This contains a value, and this contains blank. When that happens, color this red. So we can do that back into that, and I'll show you how that rule. We can use an and, because there's multiple conditions. So we use and. We'll go ahead and take a look at that. Let's bring that here so we can see both. Edit the rule, and we're going to look at the and. So the and is H108 does not equal blank, right? H is this column, does not equal blank, and I-108 does equal blank. Now, the important thing, there's two important to get this to work that I see a lot of people making mistakes on. In fact, I made those mistakes pretty often too. And the critical thing is, one, you do not want an absolute $sign here before 108, because this needs to hold true for the whole table. So the first rule is make sure it is not absolute. The row does not absolute, meaning there's no $sign there on both of those. So that's rule number one. What is rule number two? Rule number two is our table must start in 108, must start at the same place the rules are, 108, or in this case 128. But so as long as those rules apply, it starts there, then we are good to go. So that is how we do that. So that's going to help us. So those are the second rule. The table must start wherever your rule starts. The first, in this case, it's 108. So 108 must be our first on the table. And that, of course, is always going to be absolute. So those two rules, when we have those two rules, it's always going to work properly. And it's going to work just for the row that has the issue. And that way, as soon as both of those rules are false or one of those, then automatically it's going to go back to the color. So that's going to really, really help us. And that's how we instruct the user to make sure to fill in a required field. All right, so we've covered that. We've covered pay distance. Let's go into the VBA and see, before we get to the payroll, let's go into the VBA and see how we did that. One, how there's really three things going on here. One, how do we save changes automatically so that those changes are automatically put into the database? Two, how do we load? Let's go back into cancel. How do we load automatically those payroll details when it comes to payroll deductions? How do we load that information? And three, how do we save it if it's new? If it's a new transaction, how do we add the row and save it? So let's go ahead and focus on that into the VBA, into the developers. If you don't have the developers tab, of course, you want to go into the options here and make sure you're going to look under the customize ribbon and select the developers ribbon. Alt F11 will also get you there, so you can use that as a shortcut into the VBA. And we've got a lot of code here on the employee manager. We're going to focus on this for right now, and then we're going to go into that. So the changes are, we're going to be changes, right? Changes. We're looking for changes, not selection changes. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. On change of employee federal and local and tax deductions, right? And we got on change of employee additions. So these are the two sections that we're going to focus on right now. All right, so what do we do? So the first one is the on employee federal and local tax deductions, on change but not on employee load. Why do we say not on employee load? Let's go over that. When we load an employee, if I double click on that, it's going to refresh, and those are changes, right? These are changes to this cell because it's going from cells with values to blank and then back and then back to values again, right? So that's a change. But on that type of change, I don't want to save to our database. I don't want to save anything to this on that type of change. Now, how do we differentiate that type of change with a user actually putting in a specific change? That's a change too. So I need to differentiate between those two. Well, we know from prior lessons that we have something called employee load, and we look into B1. Let's go ahead and unhide this. I believe it's B1 is going to tell us whether it's the employee is loading or not. When the employee loads, this goes to true. When it finishes loading, it goes back to false. So we can say if there's a change and this is true, don't do anything. Don't save those changes to the database. Don't do anything because it's loading, right? That type of change we need. So we want to make sure always that the type of change when we're loading. So when this is true, don't make any change. I don't think you can see it a little bit too quick. Oh yeah, you can see it. There we go. So when we load an employee, you'll see how this goes to true and then back to false. So when that happens, that type of change, we do not want to save it. So when we do that, we're just going to instruct VBA not on B1, if only if B1 equals false. So we've done that in the code. So we're going to say if there's a change to G93 to 104, that is the tax table, and B1 equals false. So there's two conditions. B1 must equal false. So that's how we differentiate between. So in those two cases, if the user makes a change to anywhere, any cell between G93 and I104 and B1 is false, then do something. What are we going to do? We're going to do all of this. First, we're going to mention the payroll item row is long. I need to know that row. That row is going to either be new, right? Or it's going to be existing. And how do we know whether it's new or existing? Well, we know. We're just going to look in column K. And if we're going to enter a new item and there's nothing in column K, we know that it's going to be a new payroll item. However, if there's a value here, then we know that it's going to be an existing item. And remember, when we select a new employee, this information gets cleared out. You see, there's nothing here. So we want to make sure we've clear these cells out so each new employee gets automatically cleared. That's how we differentiate. So we make sure to clear that, and we clear this here as well. These are formulas, so we don't clear those out. So we just clear these cells. All right, so back into our employee. So that is how we go ahead and clear it. That button's a little bit close. You see how that is? That's probably too close. So when me as a user or you're going to make those mistakes, this is too close. So we have to probably increase this row or just move these buttons over a little bit. But those kind of errors, those kind of usage issues are really important. So when you come across those, let me know, because we all make those mistakes. So that kind of thing, maybe we'll get that fixed up on the final. We've got a lot of bugs, but this is just too close. Users can easily click the add new. So all right, just going over that. So when you find yourself making those mistakes, like, okay, if you make those mistakes, your users are going to make those mistakes too. So keep that in mind, just as I do. All right, so we're focused on this 19. So we can use those. We can use this whether there's a value here or not to know whether it's a new item or not. If it's a new item, we're going to find the first available row. We're going to use end.lx, going to find that, and then we're going to add the details here. Now, for a new item, we want to make sure we add the employee ID. We want to add the tax item type. We want to add the item name. We want to make sure to add the employee row and the database row. Those are for new items. For existing items, we just need to update the details. So there's a differentiator. New items, we get a lot of more data. Existing items, just whatever the update information here. We don't need to add the row again. We don't need to add the database. We don't need to add the type or the employee ID. So that's not going to change. So we do those only on new items. So let's go ahead and back into the employee manager and then back into the VBA and show you that. So the first thing we want to do is ask an if statement. If K in the target row is empty, then we know it's a new item. And if it's a new item, we need to add a lot more things, right? If it's an existing item, we just need to use our data mapping and have one line of code. So new items, we do a lot. So what do we do on the new item? Well, the first thing is we need to know the pay item row. We need to set that up. The pay item row is going to be sheet 17. Sheet 17, of course, is our employee default. This is sheet 17 right here. Employee default payroll items. That is our sheet 17. So with that sheet, what we're going to do is we're going to find the first available row. We can use end XLUp to find that +1. This is going to find us our last row of data. With data, this +1 is going to add 1, so it's going to be our first available row. And that's going to set the pay item row. Now that we have that, now we're ready to add in the data. We're going to know A is going to be where our employee ID, and our employee ID is found in J2 on our employee manager. And you'll notice there's no sheet reference here. Why is that? Because we're on the sheet. We're on employee manager sheet. When we're on a specific sheet, we don't need to refer to a specific sheet. It is already known that when you use it. Now, if we do need to refer to a specific sheet, we do need to put that name in. If we need to refer to other sheet other than employee manager, we need to specify it. However, if we're on the sheet, we don't need to specify sheet 1. We do not need, or employee manager. We'll just assume because we're coding on the sheet itself. Now, of course, if we're in an individual module, we always need to specify the sheet because we don't know. All right, so we've got that employee ID. And then, of course, we need to list in the column B, we need to know what type of item. Since we're focused only on the employee federal and local tax deductions, we're going to mark this as tax deduction. That's going to be the item type that we're going to set. Now, of course, in H, remember H, we need to save our employee row. What row are we working on here? We need to know that. And I need to put that in column H right here. So whatever row our target row is going to go right here. And then, of course, we're going to put in a formula row. And that's going to help us once we filter it. And I'll show you how that plays in a little bit later on. But once we run our advanced filter in there, we need to know what row to go back to. So this is going to help us if there's a change. So we put this row and we put it right in here. And then if we make any changes, we know exactly what row to make those changes. And so it really saves us a lot of code. All right, back into the VBA. So we're going to put our database manager row in column H. We're going to need to know that if we make changes. And of course, we're going to put on our formula row, which sets our database row up. And of course, one more thing we need to do is we need to mark K, column K, with the pay item row. And that means I've got to put that row right here in column K. So as soon as we add a new item, that row is going to be placed right here. And moving forward, when we make changes to either of these two columns, we automatically know what row to put that in. So that's how we've got that. So that's all for a new item. This is all for a new item. What if it's an existing? Well, if existing, we use data mapping. The pay item row, else the pay item row equals K in the target row. If it's an existing, we can set the pay item row to right here. We know if it's existing, our pay item row is going to be in K. So we can set the pay item row right there. All right, moving forward. Now we need to the last item, and regardless whether it's new or whether it's existing, right? We're new or existing, but for both conditions, new or existing, we are going to use data mapping. And what we're going to do is with that mapping is we're going to save anything else to the database. And remember, we have some other things. What if we make a change here, here, or here? I want to save those to the database. And how do we go about doing that? Well, actually, I have my data mapping here in pay additions, and it's going to be located right here, 3, 6, and 7. This row 140 is our database. I put in the number 3, I've put in the number 6, and number 7. Why did I put those numbers in? These are the columns in which we're going to save it in our database. So I know if the user makes a change here, to change column 3 right here. Column 3 is C, right? And then also column 6 and 7, 6 and 7, right? So this is column. So if you look here, equals column, right? That's going to be column 3. And if we drag this over, we're going to see that we also, these two are going to be used for tax item, right? So we know that. But we're focused on, we were focused on tax. So let me go back to that. 6 and 7. So based on tax, let's go pull that tax up again so we can, because we were on that. So I want to make sure we cover that. Back in there, employee manager, so we're on tax information, and here we have 3, 4, 5, and 6. We have that on the tax. So these are the column numbers. 3 is the name, remember that's the same name, regardless if it's a tax item, if it's a deduction or addition, we're going to go column 3. 4 is the wage percentage, 5 is the base limit, 6 we don't need, that's going to be calculated. So let's get rid of that, we don't need that. Pay deductions and pay additions have the same, 3, 6, and 7, right? So we've mapped those columns, and they're the same here. 3, 4 is the wage, 5 is the base limit, amount is 6, 7 is frequency, 8 we don't need. Okay, so that's how we map them. So that means So let's go ahead and take a look back in there when we make a change into the employee manager. When we're in tax information, when I make a change to the tax information or pay deductions, for example, let's go to pay additions because we've got the mapping right here. Okay, so if I make a change here, let's make a change here because we already have a row. We know what row and we know what column. Row and column, we need those two things, row and column, to make those changes. So if I change this to, I think we have this open. If I change this to anything, right? I know, and we know the sheet because it's going to be employee pay defaults. We know the column, column 3, and we know the row. So when we make a change to row 8, column 3, we know it's automatically, so we know where to save that. So that's how mapping comes in handy. That's why it's so important. We know, and that way we can just use one line of code. Now let's do it again. If this is column 7 and it's row 8, so any change we make here, column 7, row 21 in this case, we know that it's going to automatically make those changes in our data, in our table right here. So we go to row 21, we're going to see it's now paid weekly, right? I've got the columns here, which we don't need. So it's now weekly. So automatically it gets added here. So if we continue on and we add an amount, we add an item here. So food reimbursement, and we make this 100. Now we're going to see weekly. It's going to be all fed up. We know the row, and we use these columns here. So we know they're in row 40. So row 140 and the target column, that's very important. We're going to pull the 3, we're going to pull the 6, and we're going to pull the 7. So into the code, let me show you how we did that. So in this case, it's going to be 90. Why 90? Because our tax information, which is what we're focused on, is on row 90. Our columns I've put here in row 90. So 90 is going to tell us 3, 4, or 5. So back into our data mapping. Cells, we know the row, right? We've already defined the row. If it's going to be in K, new regardless now. We've defined the row already. Now we need to get the column. Well, where's the column? For our tax items, our column is in row 90 of the current column. Row 90 of the current column. This value right here, this value is going to tell us our column 3, 6, 4, 5, right? 3, 4, 5. So we know the row, we know the column. Now we could say sheet 17 of the row and the column equals a target value. So this one line of code will take care of all of that. And that's how we do for the tax items. For the additions and deductions, it's exactly the same. Exactly the same. We define our range. In fact, we've got 2 ranges here. We're going to be using both additions and deductions. That's why you have 2 ranges, 108 to 119 and 128 to 139. That covers both additions and deductions. Pay additions, deductions are here. Our range is here, which is G108 through I-119. Pay additions is going to cover this range right here, G128 through I-139. So we've covered. If the user makes any changes in either one of those 2 ranges, and of course, if the employee is not loading, meaning B1 is false, then do something. All right, and what are we going to do? And B1 equals false. Then we're going to do all this. Again, we're going to go through the same. If the K in the target row, the K is empty, then it's a new pay item. Otherwise, it is an existing pay item. If K is a value, we're going to pull it from K. So again, we're going to do the same things. We're going to determine the pay item row if it's new based on the first available. We're going to set the employee ID in column A. And then in this case, we're going to do something a little bit different. I need to set whether it's a pay addition or pay deduction, right? We're going to use this table for both. Pay addition or pay deduction right here, pay deduction. We don't know because we're using this table for, so how can we differentiate? How do we know whether it's a pay addition or pay deduction? Well, let's take a look here. If it's a pay addition, if it's a pay deduction, our row is going to be somewhere between 108 and 119. If it's a pay addition, our row is going to be somewhere between 128 and 139. So we can use that row differentiation to determine whether we are working with a pay addition or pay deduction. And that is exactly what we did here in the code. If the target row is greater than 127, then we know it is a pay addition. Then we want to set B in the payroll item to pay addition. Otherwise, set it to pay deduction. Otherwise, set it to pay deduction, right? Pay deduction is first, right? So pay addition is second. So if it's greater than 127, right here, pay additions, if it's great, 127 is here. So if it's greater than 127, we know it's a pay addition. If it's less than that, of course, it's a pay deduction because 119 is our last row. So we can use that target row to determine whether the user has made a change to either the payroll deduction or payroll addition. And then we can make that change in the database correctly right here. So of course, we would put in pay deduction or pay addition here in column B. So we can differentiate between those two. All right, next up, so we have that. Now we're going to, of course, we're going to set the employee manager row in column H, just like we did with the tax item up here. And of course, the K in the pay item row, we're going to set that right here. And of course, we're going to use a target row. We're going to set the target row here. This time it's 140. 140 is where we're going to determine our columns. And we just set that up here in the employee manager right here. Under the pay additions, 140 is the row that I've used to map our columns, whether it's column 3, column 6, or column 7. And of course, we're going to change this font color to the same as the background color, so it's going to be gone. When we do our final version, these will not be visible. So using these, row 140 and the target column, we know the column of the database, whether it's column 3, whether it's column 6, or column 7. So we can use that, and that's just going to map our data just like we did in the tax. So back into that, we can use sheet 17, the row, plus the 140 and the target column, this value right here, this one right here, that's our column number. This is our, whether this is 3, 6, 5, or 6, or 3, 6, or 7, I should say. 3, 6, or 7. So we know the row 3, 6, 7. We're gonna put the target value right there, and that is actually all we have to do to make those changes, so that automatically any changes that we make are automatically saved. So if we change this to 200 in row 21, our amount automatically changes to 200 right here. All right, so now we know how to save those changes, but how do we load? When we load an employee, how do we clear this out and load that information in? Well, we can use advanced filter for that. We know the employee ID is here. And we also know that we have the employee ID here. So all we need to do, and we know we have the employee ID here. So all we need to do is run an advanced filter for just this employee ID. And we can do that right here. So we run our advanced filter. We create a criteria for our advanced filter right here. And we put in the criteria right there. So we can do that here if the employee ID is here. And then we run our results here. So all we need to do is create an advanced filter, put in our criteria, which is 1220, and then run a filter so we pull only those items, tax table items, right, with or deductions or additions with that specific employee ID. And then what we do is we run a for next. I determine the last row. We make sure that there is data. So if the last row is less than 3, then we know, less than 2, then we know there is no data. So we do want to check that in our code. So as long as there is data in here, we're going to run a for next loop from row 2 all the way to the last row. And what we're going to do is we're going to determine if it's a tax deduction. We're going to put this information, we're going to put this in row 93. We're going to put this in row 94. We're going to put this in row 95. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the name, the wage, and the base limit. And then I'm going to put the database row and put that in column K. And then, of course, for pay additions, we're going to add in, of course, our name. We're going to put in our amount and monthly. I'm going to put that in row 128. And we're going to put our column in column K, right? So we're going to put in, for pay additions, we're going to put in the name, the amount, the frequency, and in column K, we're going to put the column, the row of the database right here. So that's all we need to do in the code. You just need to run add our criteria, run our advanced filter, have all the filtered data appear here, run a for next loop from the first to the last, determine what type it is, and then where to put it. What are we going to put it? Here. And we're going to either, if it's a tax item, we're going to add this information. If it's a addition or deduction, we're going to add this information, and we're going to add this information. So that's how it's done. Let's get to it. Let's show you how we did that in the VBA. So we've created a module here actually in the employee we do have employee load macros here, so we've added that in. And of course, in the employee load, I've added pay items refresh. This is a brand new macro. You've seen the others before, but I've added employee item refresh, and this is consistent with the other macros. And basically what I want to do is I want to run a separate macro that refreshes the payroll tax, other deductions, and other additions into the employees. And if we scroll down, we're going to find that macro all the way down here and do the employee pay item refresh. All right, so we're going to walk through this line of code just as we did before. So we need to determine the last pay item row, because if I'm going to run an advanced filter, I need to know what the last row of data is here. In this case, it's 21. I want to run an advanced filter all those with all of the data, so I need to first get the last row. So we need to determine what that last row is. All right, next up in our code, we have the last filter row. We need to get the last row of the filter. That's important. We also need the pay item row. We need to run through all the rows, so we're going to run, and I need to know the employee manager row and the item type. So we're going to, all of those are going to be defined. And with 17, we're going to be primarily focused on 17, which is our pay item default table, just as we've been focused on that same table that we're focusing on. The first thing I want to do is clear any previous criteria and results. I want to clear it out. I want to make sure that all this is cleared out. Just like that, I want to delete it and clear it all out so we can get ready, so I can put in the employee ID and all the information. So we want to do that. That's the first thing we want to do. Next thing I want to do is M2. That is our criteria. I want to put the employee ID right in M2. The employee ID is going to go right here in M2, because that's our criteria, how we're going to. And next up, I want to know the last pay item row. That's the last row in our main table. We're going to use column A, X. So to run our advanced filter, we need to know the last row of our main data. So next up, what we can do is we can say now we're ready for the advanced filter. So with sheet 17, of course, A2 is our first column and first row, including the headers. Remember, when we run our advanced filter, we must always include the header row. So A2 is going to be the first, and the last is going to be I, and of course the last row of data. That's going to be our main data in which we're going to be running our advanced filter. So it's going to go all the way from A2 to I and the last pay item row. And we're going to run our advanced filter. We want to copy that information over, and of course we've got our criteria. It's going to include the header here and the value here. So M1 through M2, of course, that's the employee ID. And where do we want the results to appear? We want the results to appear in all the way from O1 to W1. That's where we've set the area for our criteria. And that's going to be just the headers, O1 through W1. And that's where we want all the information to be displayed below there. So that's going to get us, and of course we want the unique values as true. Now we've got our data. Now when we run our advanced filter, I just need to perform a check. I need to make sure that there actually is data here. Sometimes employees may not if they're new. So we don't want to go through transferring over or running a for next loop if there's no data. So we need to check what is the last row. If it's less than 2, then cancel out. But if it's more than 2, of course, continue on. So we're going to run that. The last filter row, of course, equals O, column O, and up. That's getting us our last filter row. We're going to run that check. If the last filter row is less than 2, then go to no payment. It's going to skip all of this and go right here. We don't need to continue on. We don't need to transfer any information to the employee manager because there is no data. Of course, assuming there is data, meaning that there is values in 2 or greater, then we can run our for next loop that I discussed. For the pay item equals 2 to the last filter row. And the item type is P. The item type is P in column P and the item type row. That is going to be our item type in column P here, right? P is going to be our item type. Item name is Q, employee ID is here, and our employee manager row, that's going to be important. That's in column V, and our database row in column. So keep those in mind when we run it. The employee manager row is in V, right? We just saw that. And now we're ready to go to sheet 1. That is our employee manager sheet. We need to say sheet 1 because we're using sheet 17 here. So we need to specify sheet 1 right here. G, right? G equal a Q in the pay item row. This is our item name. Then we know the employee manager row. Employee manager row is here, and equals Q, the name. It's always going to go in G, the name, and that's regardless of the item type. Regardless, let's take a look at that just so you know. Regardless of the name is always going to go in G. So let's look at that. We have 3. We're focused on 3. Tax name also in G. Pay deductions also in G. Pay additions, also in G. So that's constant for every item. And another thing constant is the row is always going to go in K. K here for pay additions, K for pay deductions, K for the tax information. So those are consistent regardless of the table. So we can add those in. We don't need to run an if loop. We know that G is going to have the name, which is in Q. We also know that K is going to have the pay database row. So we can do those things regardless of the item type. And now we get into the deductions or additions. Now, if the tax item equals tax deduction, then H and I equals R and S. What is that? H and I, H is wage, I is base limit. So we're going to add that information equals, what does it equal? Here, wage and base limit, R and S. R is wage. So we just need to bring that information over into right here, wage and base limit. So those two items are going to be brought right in there. So we've got those covered. But what if it's a pay addition? So if it's tax deduction, then do that. Else, pay addition or deduction. Else, then H equals T, which is the amount, or U, which is the frequency. So again, if we're in pay deductions or pay additions, the amount is in column H and the frequency is in column I, and that's the same for deductions and additions, I and H. So we can bring, what we want to do is I want to bring the amount and frequency from T and U here, and I want to bring them into right here, H and I. So we've done just that with those lines of code. H equals T, the amount here, and the frequency here. We're going to run that loop, run this loop for every single line. That's going to bring it in. That's going to bring it in for whether it's tax. So it's a very relatively simple code for all three different databases, all three different tables. So that's it. That's all we need to do with that macro, and that's going to load in our information. We run this every time an employee loads. So that's how we do that. Now we know how we save them. Now we know how we load them, and now we know how we get this information in this. And the reason is we need to make sure that this information appears on the payroll. So let's move next on to the payroll screen, which is a great screen. And I'm glad we're going to get that started today, and we're going to continue it next time, but there's a lot I want to show you on the payroll. And basically the idea with the payroll is when we click on the payroll details, what I want to do is I want to give the user the ability to select a specific payroll. Let's move this over. I want to give the user the ability to select a specific payroll and have those dates appeared. And if you remember, we have a list of payroll dates right here. You remember we created these in the admin screen. Let's go review here. In the admin screen, we have the ability to create payroll. Here's our payroll periods. And we have the ability, remember, when we click create payroll, we can set how often we want our payroll. We get a start date, how many we want to create, and we can create those pay periods based on a frequency and based on a start date. And so once those are created, we then have the period name, we have a start date, and we have an end date. So if we select any one of these from a drop-down list, we can pull then both the start date and the end date here. So back into our payroll screen we go, and we'll show you just how we need. So when I pull a specific payroll, I can then automate the specific from date, and I can automate the to date, or we can add in our custom date. So I want to be able to set the payroll dates. That's very important. So we can set the from and to date because we need to pull the time clock data based on this from and based on the to date. I want to pull the time clock data. We have all of our time clock data list here. So I want to pull that information based on the clock in date. And I need to pull it based on just those dates. So that's very important. All right. So moving back onto payroll. So now we know why we select a pay period, because that's going to automate our from and to dates. I also may not want to pay every single employee. Maybe I only want to pay a certain active or inactive or terminated employees. We can create multiple statuses from the admin, and then we want to pay only on status. Or maybe we only want to pay certain types. Maybe we only want to pay hourly employees, or maybe we only want to pay salary employees. So we have the ability to display only those employees that are marked by a pay type. And of course, in the employee manager, in the specific employee settings, we can set the pay type. Let's go back we can set the pay type into general info. Here we have, that would be in the payrolls and details here. Pay type right here, hourly or salary. So we can set the pay type here. All right, so that's just a little bit of refresher on pay type. So we can differentiate. We may not want to pay all those employees at the same time. or we want to select specific. We also have the ability to, if we want to, we can create multiple positions, and then we can pay based on a position. Maybe we only want to pay field staff, or maybe we only want to pay the owner. That's a nice idea if I'm the owner, or manager, right? I don't really have too much of this data set up, but you can see it gives you the basic, it filters it based on the position. Or maybe you have employees based on different frequency. Maybe I only want to pay weekly employees. Maybe I only want to pay those on bi-weekly or on summit. So our employees have different pay frequency. We may want to pay based on just those frequencies. So we have that ability as well. So basically the idea is to filter your employees. If you have a large company, you may have different payrolls for different employees. So we also have the ability to select all and select none. And the idea is I want to select specific employees. I want to bring them over to the employees. Maybe you want all, but if we just want some, we can just select those employees, and then I want to add those selected to here. Or I may want to remove the selected, which we can do here. So it's a really great way to do it. I'm going to show you just how we did that. So add selected and then remove selected. So we can get the way of that. That's a really great feature. I think we added, it looks like I gotta add some. I think it's not quite. There's a small bug here. I'll fix that before it gets sent to you. See, we've only selected 3, but let's select none and see if that works. All right, that works. So there's a small bug in here when you select multiple ones. I think it added more, but I'll fix that. Don't you worry about that. And so we also have the ability to select multiple and then add those. You see? Oh, there we go. Now it's working. All right, there's a small bug. I'll fix that. No worries. And I also want to summarize the pay period. This is not working yet, but I'll get it working. I want to know how many working days are in the pay period based on the company. I want to know how many employees were selected. This is just a number. It's not formulated yet, but I just kind of put that as a placement here because I want to remember that. So let's see how we did that. In step 2, of course, we're going to review the employees, and I wanted to show you that. We'll go through each employee. And of course, step 3, we're going to have the summary of everything. So let's go through just this one and see how we did that. Into the developers tab, one more thing. We also want to display employees with pay period time clock data. I may only want to display those employees that have data in the specific time period, not all of them. This is not functioning yet, but it's the idea I've placed here because I want to make this function. And what that means is I want to remove all the employees from this list that don't have any time clock data in this specific period, from or to in this specific period. I only want to display employees with data. So that might be really helpful. So I've added that in, but it's not quite functioning yet. I've had a lot of work to do this week, so we'll get to it. Of course, payroll is a mess, so I want to go through it slowly so that you make sure you get everything. You can customize this or do your own, of course. All right, so into the developers tab, let's take a look at this under the Visual Basic, and we're going to focus on the on sheet, the payroll. Let's go ahead and click on the payroll sheet, and we've got some selection changes here, and we've got some worksheet change here. So let's go on to the selection change and go over that. The first thing is we notice we've got some code. We do have a pop-up calendar, as you noticed here, under our from and to dates, and that gives the user the ability to customize dates based on this. Of course, remember this calendar I created so you can change the color and customize it to any different color you want. So it's really great. It's a shape-based pop-up calendar, so keep that in mind. And once you change it, of course, there's always change. Let's get back to that blue or a blue. And so we have to, let's do code. So that means J6 or, of course, J8. If there's a selection change to either of those, I want to show the calendar. We can do that here. We can just say, basically, what this code does is if the calendar is missing, it's going to undo the last action, just in case it is missing, and that's going to help undelete it if the user accidentally deletes it. That's what this code is for here. And then, of course, if the user makes a selection change to J6 or J8, also AM4 later on in the payroll, this will come up. J6 to J8. If it's nothing, then we're going to check to make sure there's a sheet. That's part of the macros to run the calendar. And then, of course, we're going to show the calendar. We're going to run a macro that shows the calendar. Otherwise, hide it. Means if the user selects anything else, hide that calendar. If the user selects anything else, hide the calendar. All right, so we've got that covered. The reason it didn't work here is because I made multiple selections. That's going to work. If we select one single cell, it will work. All right, so that's how that is done there. Now we sit on selection of employees to add on selection. If there's a selection to D11 through D310 or L11 to L310. I want to make some changes. What kind of changes? What kind of selection changes? That means if the user makes a selection change to this, or user makes a selection change to this here, L starting at L11 all the way to 310, and the same thing with D11. I want something to happen, so the user gives the ability to add those selected employees to there. So we can select an employee and then add those two employees. So I want to be able to select those and have them marked as checkbox. And if there's a checkbox, I want to uncheck them. So it's check or uncheck. We did go over that in a training before, but I'll go ahead and go over that to you. So it's relatively simple. If the target value equals B, what is this B? That's the checkbox in the Wingdings font. Wingdings font. That's the font we're using. So if you take a look at this font here, right, and we go into the home, we'll see that that's Wingdings font. And of course, you can find these characters when we go ahead and insert the symbol here. We could find that right here under the Wingdings font, and it's the checkbox. We can use checkbox, so we can use a few different ones. So that's how we did that, and that of course is the Wingdings font. So the font for that cell is automatically set to Wingdings. So all we need to do is enter that character. Let's exit out of this cell. All we need to do is enter this character and automatically show up as a checkbox. If the target value equals a checkbox, then uncheck it. This character here is the unchecked box. However, else put it as the checkbox. So we're checking for a check. If there's a checkbox, we're going to uncheck it. Else, check it. That means if it's currently not checked, check it. So that's how. Here's something. If the target column equals 4, then B7 equals false. What is that? Well, that's the reason is, let's say we check all here, but I want to check some, I want to uncheck. I want this select all to automatically go to unchecked. And the same thing for this. If I've selected all and this is checked, but if I select one, I want this to go to unchecked automatically. Well, this checkbox, let's take a look at this. This is grouped. Let's take a look at this checkbox right here. Right click, and then we're going to format the control. Now, if we look at this checkbox, we'll see that B7 is the cell. B7 is a cell. So let's take a look at that. If I mark B7 as true, it's going to automatically be checked. True. It's going to automatically be checked. If I mark B7 to false, it's going to automatically be unchecked. So I know that if I uncheck these, I want to make sure B7 is false. If I check or uncheck, I want to make sure, in this case, B8 is false. If we right-click this one, it's in the group. Right-click here, and then we'll go to Format Control. We'll see that this cell link is B8 here. So I know that if I make B8 false or true, I can change the status of this checkbox automatically. So we could do that. Let's bring this up a little bit. Okay, so we can do that using the false or true. So that means when I select it, I want to make sure. So if the column is 4, if this column D is 4, then make B7 false. However, if the column is not 4, it's going to be one of these, then in that case, make B8 false. So that's all we've done with that one line of code. If the target column equals 4, then B7 equals false. Else, that means the target column is not 4, then B8 is false. So I want to set those two. That's kind of a nice feature that gives the ability. The reason we do that is so that if the users, let's say we select all, right? And let's say the user unselects 2, but he wants to select all again. All he needs to do is recheck this and it selects all again. So let's go ahead and go into that. Let's see how did we assign. Let's take a look at that and right click and see how we assign the macro to do that. And that is a macro called Payroll set to pay select all. Payroll select to pay set all. So let's go ahead and look at that and find that macro and see how we did that. We've covered the selection change already. And so we've covered that. So now we can move on to the macros. Under the payroll here, let's see, we have set up here. And that's going to cover, I believe it, payroll, remove selected employees, select all. This is the one we're focused on. Payroll, select to pay, select all. We also have one more, payroll, employee to pay, select all. So we have 2 of them. To pay is here, right? And then to be paid is here. So we have 2 different macros, almost the same functionality, but they both are covering different columns. So we want to focus on that. So the first of which, select to pay, select all. We're going to determine the last selected rows long. I need to know what the last row is. And we can determine that. I want to know what the last row of employees. In this case, of course, it's 102. So I need to know that. And in this case, of course, it is 19. So we need to determine the last row. So the last row in the selected is D99XNL up. Maybe we add one more 9 because you have over 1,000 employees. All right. So the last selected row is going to be D, and that's going to get us our last row. Now we know if B7 is true, we need to know whether now this has two functions, right? It's either going to select all or select none. There's two different functions. So if this is currently true, that means they're all selected. Then I need to unselect them all. If it's currently false, if B7 is currently false, then I need to select them all. So we can use the B7 value to determine whether we're going to select all or select none. So we're going to say if B7 value equals true, then D11 through D in the last row equals checked. That means checked. So then we're going to check them all. Otherwise, uncheck them all here. D11, otherwise, so we're going to check them all and uncheck using this line of code based on the value of B7. And we're going to do the same exact thing, same code, except we're going to be in column L. Column L is going to be the same thing, select all or select none. So that's how we select all or select none. Now, if you look what this cool is, when we uncheck, you'll see that the font changes automatically. And to check them, that's how we differentiate. We can use conditional formatting to do that. Let's go ahead and take a look into the home and go into the conditional formatting, and we're going to manage rules. We're going to take a look at that one rule to see how we did that. All we need to do when we edit that rule, we're going to see D11 equals B. That's that same symbol, that little B. It's not really a B, it's a check mark. That's the same exact symbol for wingdings that shows if it's checked. And the most important thing in here, again, two important things we're going to go over. 11 must not be absolute. There must not be a $sign before 11. That's the one very important condition. The other very important condition is that our database applies to must start also on row 11. Those two things have to be the same, and then it'll work just fine for each individual row. So that's how we covered it. We've covered that for both the same. We got the same conditional formatting right here. So if we look under conditional formatting for the manager rules for this, we're going to see the same thing, but in this case it's L11, and our applies to starts on L. So it's the same exact thing. So that is how we covered that. All right, so now we've got that. We know how do we focus? How do we get these to move over here? And it can be a little bit complicated because I want to make sure that I don't add the same employee twice. That's important. If the employee has been added already, I don't want to add them to the list. So when we select it and add selected, I want to make sure to remove all the selected employees from this list, and I want to put them here. And so I only want to have those that were not selected here. And so if I add two more, I want to add those and I want to clear the list. And if I move them back, I want to move them all back here. So if I unselect them and select them, what I want to do is I want to remove the selected employees. For example, if I select this, I want to remove that selected employee from this list and move them over here. So when we add select employee, you'll notice 1063 is no longer in this list. It's in this list. So that's a really, really handy feature, but we want to make sure we don't have duplicates, and the best way to do that is to remove it from the original list and put them here. So that keeps us from doing it. If we right click on the add selected employees, and we can see what macro has been assigned. If we click on the assign macro, we can see we have payroll add selected employees. So that's the macro we're going to be focused on, and we're going to go into the VBA and take a look at that. And I think if we scroll up here, payroll add selected employees, and this of course is in our payroll setup module. We're going to have multiple modules on payroll. Payroll setup is what we're going to be focusing on. So payroll add select employees. So the first thing we want to do is we want to dimension some long rows. Pay row, we're going to need to know that, and the selected row, we're going to need to know that also, right? So that's important. And then of course the last paid row and the last select row, we need to know that information. And also we're going to set a range, found employee ID range. And what I want to do basically is when I select it, I want to make sure, just in case, I want to make sure that neither one of these IDs are in this list here. So I need to check this entire list just to make sure, because if the user resets this list, it's possible that the same name is going to be here. So we want to prevent that. So what I want to do is I want to put a search. I'm going to say, I'm going to go through this list, 1, 12, 20. Is it in this list? If not, add it. and then remove it from here. Then we're going to do the next one, 1001. Is it in this list? If not, add it and then remove it from here. So that's what we want to do when we go through the BDA. So the first thing is we're going to stop the calculations because this will be very slow if we don't. Stopping the calculations is the macro, of course, and that macros can be found right here. And all we're going to do with the stop calculation is we're going to enable events false. We're going to turn the calculations to manual, and the screen updating is going to go to false. And the only important thing when we run this macro is that before the end of the macro that we're currently running, we must reset everything. And that means bringing events to true, the calculation back to automatic, and the screen updating back to true. So when we run our payroll, we want to make sure that we reset those and run the macro when we reset. So let's take a look at back in payroll. You'll see that we have stopped calculation, but by the end of the macro, we will reset. That's important. If there's a bug somewhere between here, we cannot exit out of this without resetting the calculation. Otherwise, it creates issues for the workbook, because you want screen updating, you want calculations normally on automatic, but when we're running this, it's a lot faster if we can temporarily stop those. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is determine our last rows. I need to know what the last row is here. That's kind of a bug. You see that? You shouldn't happen. You should not allow the user to select a cell that doesn't have it. So that means it's a bug. Let's go ahead and fix that right now. I want to make sure that there's actually a value here before the user can select that, right? There's no reason the user should be able to select it without a value. So let's go ahead into the developers and fix that bug while we're working on it. Back into the payroll here, into the payroll, right? And we have here, we just went over that, right? If it's nothing, but let's add something to that here. And what we want to do is we want to say, I want to know the target row to the right must include a value. And, right, range, actually we can do cells. What is the column? Target, row, target, we could use offset also, column, +1, dot value, must not be empty, right? We want to make sure it's not empty in this. And cells target row, target column posted must not be empty. So that's the only way we want. So now let's try it out, see if it works. Okay, good. Now it works. You see, now when we select nothing, or so we can delete these. So now what it's going to do is going to say if the target column, if the target is to the right is empty, then don't do anything. So now when we select it, now it works. Okay, good. Yeah, that because we don't want to be able to select it unless there's actual employees, but if there is one, then we want to be able to select it. Okay, great. So we've fixed that bug live. So let's go back into that. Let's go back into our macro, what we were focused on, and take a look at that. So the idea was, let's see, payroll set up here. Now, so we need to determine those last rows, both D and L, the last row that has a value. I need to pull those up. I also need to make sure if the last paid row is less than 10, then we're going to set it to 10. We need to make sure that is there. We need to know the last row so that I can add values, right? If the last row, in this case, it's 11, so I need to know where to put our next value. So when we add it, I need to know to start at 11, 12, and 13 if the last row is 11. So that's important there. So we need to know the last row. And now we're going to run a loop. We're going to start, our selected row is going to be 11, starting at 11, to the last selected row, We need to check everything. So we're going to say if D and the selected row is checked, right? Checked, then, right, because we need to know, I need to start here, starting here, all the way. If D, if it's a check mark, if it's got the check, remember check is here, the B, actually the B, see that B here? That's the checked. So if it's checked, then do something, because we're only going to be focused on the check. Those are the only items we want to add to the list. So if it contains that B, I'll call it B, I'm sure that's not the correct name for it. Then what we want to do is, so we know we need to check for duplicates. I need to check, I need to know, is 1002 already here or not? If it's already here, don't add it. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the found employee. This is a range. And what's that range going to be? It's going to be M11 through M in the last paid row. We're going to set that range. That range is going to start here, and it's going to go all the way to the last row. This is our range, but it's actually M, sorry. M contains the employee IDs. So this is our range. It's going to be a dynamic range based on the last row. In this case, our range only contains 3 values. So all I need to do is, in this range here of 3 values, I need to check, is 1002 inside this range? And we can do that using the find right here, find. So we're going to first define the range, then we're going to find, and what is it that we want to find? E and the selected row value. That is what we're focused on. E is here. This is the ID. E and the selected, this is what we're going to be looking for. And we're going to be looking for it in this range. So we can define that. So that's we're going to be looking at values and whole. So we're looking in that range. Now, if found employee is nothing, this means not found, right? If it's not found, if it is found, if we do want to know if it's found, if not found is nothing, that means it is found. I know it's so confusing. Not and nothing cancel each other out. Cancel, there's 2 negatives. That means if it's found, right? But we really want if it's not found. So I'm going to take this out. I want to know if it's not found. If there's nothing, right? If there's nothing, that means it's not found. Then we're okay to add it. Then we can add it in. So then we go the last paid row equals the last paid row plus 1. In other words, I want to know the last one was here, but we want to add 1 because I want to put the new value. I want to put this 1002 right here. So when I click add selected employees, it puts 102 in that new row. So we need to know it's the last row plus 1. I'm going to put it right here in column 14. So that's how we would do that into the code. So we take that last paid row, we add 1, which is going to be the first available row. And then all I'm going to say is L and the last paid row through N value. L through N equals D through F. That's L through N, L's right here, L through N here, equals D through F, equals D through F. All right, so that's how we do it. So if I select an item, and I want to put that right here, I just say click this button and it adds it. Again, L through N equals D through F. So that one line of code actually adds it to the next line. Now I got to remove this. I got to remove it right from there, right? So let's go ahead and do that route. Now what we're going to do is we're going to clear the content. So what I want to do is I want to clear D through H. I want to take this one that's just been added here, or let's say we add 10012, then I want to take this, I want to clear it out. So D through H, I want to clear that out, right? We just added it, so let's clear it out with one line of code. We can do that here. D, range D, with the selected row through H and the selected row, clear it out, right? I want to remove it, but now we've got a blank space. Now I've got a blank space here, right? Just like this. So now how do we get rid of that blank space? Well, all we need to do is really sort. All I need to do is resort the list, and that'll remove the blanks. So why don't we do that? Let's go ahead and sort that. So to do that, first we're going to do that for if we're going to clear every item out, every one we added. So if we added this, and this, and this, right? I'm going to add all of those items, then I'm going to clear each one out. I'm going to clear this. So then we're basically, let's do that. Before the sort, after the next, right? Before the sort, I'm going to stop that. Let's see what it looks like. So we're going to add everything, right? All right, now we've stopped it. So you see now we've got this cleared, and this cleared. So now, right, we haven't sorted it yet, but all I've got is a bunch of blank spaces. They've all been moved over here, but they're blank. So now I got to get rid of those blank spaces, and I can do that with sort. All I need to do is sort the entire table, and it's going to clear out those spaces, and we do that with the next couple codes. Sort, first we're going to clear any sort fields. Then we're going to add a key. The key is going to be F11. That is going to be our names, right? F is where our names are. I'm going to sort it by names, which is really convenient. So we're going to sort, and we're going to sort ascending, lower to higher, or A through Z, ascending. And then we're going to run our sort range. Sheet sort 16, of course. Sort, we're going to set the range from D11 to F in the last row, starting at D11 and F in the last row. We're going to sort that, and we're going to run that sort. So when we reset it, let's go ahead and move this over. So when we continue to run it, it's going to sort that, and all the blanks are going to be removed. There, now we sort, and of course the last and most important thing, we need to reset the calculation. That's how we do that. So that's how we add items to the list, we clear the values out, and we resort the list. Now we can do the same thing for this. So let's go bring those back over with another macro. Now we have remove selected item. So let's go ahead and take a look. If we assign that macro, already been assigned, we can see the macro that's been assigned. And this one's called Payroll remove select item employees. So let's take a look at that. Very, very similar. And that's here, remove selected employees. Again, we're going to stop the calculation. We're going to dimension very much the same. We need to know both of the last rows, both in both columns. And then, of course, if the last paid row is less than 10, we're going to equal. We need to make sure the last paid row is not 10. And why is it 10 and not 11? Because we add 1 right here. So even though the headers are in 10, because before we add anything, we're going to add 1. So starting it off at 10 is fine because we add 1 right here, which makes it 11. So we're good. Again, we're going to search for it. I don't want duplicates in this, so we're going to do the same thing. If, let's say we've selected them, if one of these are equal here, we don't want to add it to the list if it's already contained in that list. So when we remove selected employees, I first want to make sure they're not in this list. So we need to define this range from the first to the last row and look. So we'll loop through. Is 1063, is it in here? If not, add it. So it's the same thing. We do that for each one. So let's go back into the code here. So we're going to define the range here. We're going to selected row 11 to the last paid row. This time it's the last paid row. This time we're starting here and going all the way down to the last paid row. So last time we went from here. This time we're going to loop through each one of these. And so what we're going to do, we're going to look for the found. And this time we're going to search the range E through the list. This time we're searching this range under E. This is the range I'm searching. Before we search this range, now we're going to search this range. And what are we looking for? We're going to look for this one. We're going to look for this list, and we're going to look for those checked items. If they're in this list, then don't add them. If they're not in, then go ahead and add them at the bottom. So if it's not found, then the last selected row equals last selected row plus 1. That means we're going to look for the last row here, and we're going to add 1, and we're going to put it right down here. We're going to put that value right there. So we're going to put whatever the context here down at the bottom of that one. So we do that. D and the last selected row plus F and all the way through F in the last selected row. Again, here will be here. D through F equals whatever the selected value equals K through N. So that's how we do it. K through N, or excuse me, L through N here, L through N. And that's going to move the employee to the first available row. And again, we're going to clear out the move values. I want to clear out, and this time we're clearing L through N, and this time I want to clear L through N. So let's take a look at that, what that would look like. And I'm going to stop the code before we run the sort, just like we did last time, so we see what it looks like once they've been moved but not cleared. So we're going to remove the selected employees. We're going to go back into the sheet, and we're going to see the blank spaces. We'll see they've been moved. And we're going to take a look at down here, and we'll see they've been moved down here, all the way here. That's probably why we had selected last time, because they've been selected. Once we remove them, maybe I should unselect them as they've been moved. I think that's a good idea. If we move them back over, maybe we'll unselect them. I'm not sure to see which one's the best, but that's probably a good idea because we can't see them down here. All right, so next up, I'm not sure. Maybe you want them selected or maybe not after removing them. Hard to say. So what we can do is now we're ready for the sort. Now on this sheet, we're going to sort these based on the name, and that's going to clear out all the blank spaces. So as we continue with that macro down here, we're going to clear our sort fields, and this time it's going to be N11. That's the name. That's what we're going to be sorting based on, which is N11, the first value here. We're going to sort it ascending again, just like we did last time. And then the entire range that we are going to sort is going to be L11 through N, the last paid row. So as we continue down that macro, again, let's move this over. I'm going to continue that macro by pressing play, and it's going to sort all those items. So now we have it. That is exactly how we run that. And now we have a set of employees. Now I want to add those employees to the payroll. So we selected all these employees. And now I want to step 2. I want to go through and now I'm ready to go through these. Now I've got these employees. on part 2, review employees. And now, coming up in part 2 next week, I'm going to show you exactly how we do save and next, save and next, save and next, and automatically save this employee payroll data so that we go through and check it. And of course, all the time clock data will show up here. If there's any time clock data, it would show up automatically. So I can't wait to show you. That's going to be in part 2 of the payroll, which is going to be part 16 of the employee manager. Looking forward to bringing that to you next week. Thank you so much for joining me. Please share and like it. And of course, please check out the dashboard course. That's how we bring you free videos each and every week. And that helps us continue on to bring these free videos for everybody. Thank you so much for joining.